Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. This week I'm really excited to welcome back Glenn Taylor, founder and co-director of the Taymount Clinic in the UK. Taymount was founded in 2003, and it's one of the only dedicated FMT treatments, fecal microbiota transplant clinics in the world that I'm aware of. Glenn developed Taymount's donor selection and quarantine safety process, the Taymount laboratory stool processing system, and the treatment delivery program that Taymount uses for FMT. As the Taymount's director of science, he oversees the lab team and the entire processing system and supervises the training of the nursing staff to deliver the treatment program. Glenn's personal specialty is human microbiome and microbiology, building on his early training in human biology, and organic chemistry. So Glenn was a guest on the show maybe a year and a half ago. We talked about fecal transplant and the way that they're applying it over there at Taymount Clinic. And I was actually in the UK for a couple of weeks doing some public speaking in October, late October, early November of last year. And I took the opportunity to head up to Hitchin, which is a little bit outside of London, and meet Glenn and the staff there. And I was really impressed with what they're doing and their professionalism and the results that they're getting and the way that they're handling the whole procedure from beginning to end. I've referred several patients there because FMT is not available in the US. It's only FDA approved for antibiotic-resistant Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. So if someone wants to get an FMT for a different condition, they're not really able to do it in the US, but that is not a limitation in the UK. So Taymount is a place that I've sent a number of patients who I thought FMT would help, and they're always well taken care of when they go there. So I wanted to have Glenn come back onto the show and kind of get an update from him on what he's learned since we talked last time, and what they're, what's new there and what the future plans are. So without any further ado, let's dive in. Hey everyone, if you're like most people I know, you don't have the time or the desire, training for that matter, to sift through the hundreds of medical studies that are published each month. But whether you're struggling with a chronic health problem or just want to maintain your health and live as long as possible, it's important to stay informed about the latest research and how it might affect your well-being. And let's face it, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the conflicting stories in the media. You need a source of unbiased information that you can rely on, one that's easy to understand without too much jargon and full of practical tips that you can put into action. That's where my website, Kresser.com, comes in. You'll find in-depth, evidence-based articles on a wide range of health and nutrition topics each week. You'll also find over 10 free ebooks on subjects like effortless weight loss, healing your gut, thyroid disorders, and natural skincare, as well as online classes and programs on optimizing nutrition for fertility and pregnancy and lowering your cholesterol without drugs. What you won't find is any third-party advertising, corporate influence, or hype-driven, headline-grabbing stories with a lot of drama but no substance. You just get the real inside scoop on the health issues that matter to you most. So head over to Kresser.com and check it out. And when you sign up for my email newsletter, you'll get instant access to my award-winning 63-page ebook, 9 Steps to Perfect Health. It's like an instruction manual for preventing and reversing disease and living a long and healthy life. Okay, now back to the show. Glenn, great to have you back on the show.
Chris, thank you very much for inviting me. It's good to be back.
So we talked a while ago, I can't even remember how long ago it was now. It's maybe a year and a half ago, about what you're doing at the Taymount Clinic. And there was a great response to that. People are really fascinated by FMT and its potential. And so I thought I'd have you back since a lot of water has passed under the bridge since we first talked. And I know you've been really busy over there. And I've certainly sent some of my own patients there and had a chance to see some really positive clinical responses. And I'd love to just take the opportunity to get an update from you here and chat a little bit about what you've learned over the past year and a half since we talked, and what you're up to now and what the future holds.
Yeah, no, great. We'll pick up on that. A lot of water has passed under the bridge. We've learned an awful lot more. And the thing that stands out the most is the striking reality of how much we still don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's such an exciting field, and I think when there's excitement, there's a tendency to maybe get a little bit ahead of ourselves in some ways. I was speaking at a symposium at UCSF this weekend, and Justin Sonnenberg was another speaker there, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And he presented some fascinating data, and the title of his presentation was "Could disrupted gut microbiome be at the root of Western disease?" And that's basically the argument that he was making, was that certainly there are a lot of environmental and genetic factors that contribute to disease, but his presentation argued that one of the key mechanisms that mediates the effect of all of these various factors is a disruption in the gut microbiome. And it was a pretty compelling presentation and a pretty compelling argument. And so after that presentation, as you can imagine, you had a room full of people that were all ready to get an FMT. Maybe we can just start with, what you've learned in terms of patients. Is it a panacea? Does everybody get better and live happily ever after? Or are there some people who respond better than others, or some, conditions that respond better than others?
But yeah, all of the above. Tick all of the above. That's version D.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things I have to do is to rein in enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
People are picking up a huge amount of information at the same time, an equal dose of misinformation off the internet, and they're starting to think that, despite all the papers being written up, despite all the case studies that are now available, a little bit of over-enthusiasm is going on, and by the time people get on the phone to me, they're absolutely convinced that FMT is the panacea to all ills, and it's the 21st century answer to medicine. And I have to kind of rein that enthusiasm back in a little bit, because our evidence is quite clearly it's not. It's a significant part of that. There is absolutely no doubt. But it's not as huge as everybody might think it is, because it's a mosaic. It's the gut microbiome plays a vitally important part. And you're talking about the presentation as to whether the gut microbiome is the cornerstone of all health. And I could, put me in front of a room full of medical people, and I will talk for 2 hours and make a fairly compelling argument on what we've seen. But I've equally got to put in a measure of caution in terms of expectation, and particularly when people end up with us having looked at everything else, have been made so many promises by medicine, and by the time they reach us, sadly, some of them are just too late. And there's a very eminent guy in the UK, he's a gastroenterologist by the name of Jeremy Sanderson, who focuses on Crohn's, Mr. Crohn's Europe, he's known.
Yes.
And he said to me the other day, Glenn, I'm sorry, but there will be times when surgery is the only option, because it's just too late.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned Crohn's and inflammatory bowel disease in general, because someone asked Justin after his talk, one of the questions was, I'm really interested in this for a patient I have. It was mostly medical professionals at the seminar. And they said, I have a patient with inflammatory bowel disease. Can we expect FMT to work well in that situation? And, Justin's not a clinician, and he's not working on the front lines with FMT as you are, but he has, some experience with the research. And what he said was something that I would tend to agree with from what I've seen from the research, and I'm curious to hear your experience with this, which is that although some patients with IBD do respond, others don't, and still others may actually even have a flare-up after the procedure. And Justin's speculation was that once the chronic inflammatory process and autoimmune process is active, as it is in IBD, introducing a large number of bacteria, even if they're healthy bacteria, can really kind of stir things up. And it may be that we need to figure out a way to quell the inflammation and get the patient in remission before an FMT can help, or perhaps there's something else that we don't yet understand. But I'm curious to hear your take on that.
But I think you've just given me the answer. That's exactly what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I was giving a talk at a prominent London hospital by the name of St. Thomas's, and there the talk was addressed to immunologists. And Professor Simon Murch came over after my presentation to talk specifically about the autoimmune side of what we were doing, and trying to make sense of what happened when bacteria go in and try and recommunicate. And Simon was telling me how a lot of his work on both allergies and inappropriate expressions of the immune system was based on the fact that with inflammatory bowel disease, obviously, those who suffer from it know that there's a massive disruption at the epithelial layer. Now, one of the features of our healing process is the moment that we detect inflammation, we make masses and masses of immature stem cells and send them directly to the site of the inflammation to replace the broken cells, the ones that have been torn to pieces by the immune system. Now, one of the problems here is that immature stem cells on their own are actually pro-inflammatory. So they turn up in a site of inflammation, which isn't too helpful sometimes, but on its own can be coped with. If we were then to introduce FMT or into the fecal transplant, bacteria are pro-inflammatory. So if you keep compounding the level of inflammatory agents on a site that's undergoing inflammation, what do you expect to happen? We have to stop patients coming in. They are desperate. I've got a flare going on. Great. Go back to your doctor. Bring it under control. No, I need FMT. No, you don't.
Yes.
What you need is to use whatever methodology is available to you medically to bring your inflammatory markers back right down to rock bottom so that you don't have inflammation going on, albeit temporarily, albeit artificially, but you need to reduce your inflammation, because when we put these little bacteria in, they will elevate the immune response.
Right.
They just do it. Even for patients without inflammatory bowel disease, we've got something we call Dip Day Thursday, Chris. It means Monday, patients come in, start their process, and you've got a first implant on Monday after the initial cleansing process. Tuesday, Wednesday, now the bacteria are starting to make their presence known, and there's an elevation of immune markers. We're seeing inflammation starting to rise. Only small amount, but sufficiently the patient notices. And they come in tears, with almost like flu or cold-like symptoms, now starting to really doubt if they've done the right thing, wondering about the wisdom of this whole treatment, beginning to panic. They've traveled a huge distance. They've paid a lot of money. Oh, what have we done? And then we have to talk them in off the window shelf to try and say, like, we didn't tell you beforehand because you would then manifest it to happen. But everybody undergoes the little dip. And it always happens around about Thursday. So welcome to Dip Day Thursday.
Right. Got it. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we're dealing with something that's almost equivalent to an organ transplant, and it's been argued that it could be considered that. I mean, it's not from a medical perspective, but we're talking about infusing trillions of microbes into a dynamic environment that regulates, that probably comprises 80% of our immune system. So it's no surprise that there would be a significant response in an immune inflammatory disease. So let's look at the other side of the coin, though. If you had to pick a few conditions that you've seen over the years respond particularly well in general, and of course, everyone should understand that doesn't mean it guarantees a response in their situation, but if there are certain conditions that tend to respond better than others, what would those be?
Okay, starting from the top, everybody knows about Clostridium difficile. We've developed a method of treatment, a treatment program that not only gets rid of Clostridium difficile, but absolutely prevents a recurrence. And it simply was just doing it again and again. One implant. Oh, look, we're getting a 65-70% success rate. Really? What happens if we put 2 in? Oh, I don't know. It's never been done before. How about giving it a go? Second one in, we now get 75-80%. They go, that's astonishing. Well, that's brilliant. Let's call it a day. Really? So you carry on until you get to the figure that you are looking for as an outcome. I wanted 100%. 5 days implant. Are you all listening out there? 5 days implant, not just displaces the Clostridium difficile, but also recreates the underlying microbiota with the essential diversity and density that without it caused the problem with Clostridium difficile in the first place. So C. diff, that's the easy falling off a log. I would then say the next ones that are most common to us, many doctors referring their patient to us after a course of life-saving antibiotics or watching what goes on in their gut and going, whoops, I've saved their lives, but I've set up another problem. Mm-hmm. So patients come in and we restore their microflora, and that's extraordinarily successful. That works really well. Then you move on to what most people are expecting us to be dealing with, IBDs, Crohn's, colitis. Colitis, doing quite well on colitis, actually. The longer we're allowed to treat the patient, the better the results. A little bit like Jack Nicklaus said, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. The point is that it's not just here's the treatment program, it stops. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, oops. There are conditions where we keep going. We've got this built into the program, the communication with the patient, where we're continuing to supply updated implants for them to a self-treatment in their own environment. Mm-hmm. We've got some patients where we're getting to 1 or 2 years before they start to see complete remission. When I say complete remission, when we get a report back from their gastroenterologist who's just completed their last endoscopy, the camera going in, and then saying to their patient, well, if I hadn't known you've had colitis for the past 15 years, I would never have been able to tell. I can't see a single sign of it. Wow. I go and have a look. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now that I call remission. And there are scales of it up until then. So we don't know. The immune system is one of the most difficult to understand and poorly understood systems in the human body. If we understood the immune system, life would be easy. But we don't. So we have no clue how each and every single patient is going to respond. Not just that they have one type of disease, but everybody goes home to a different environment. And in that environment, they're exposed to a lot of environmental challenges. And we don't know what all those challenges are going to be. We don't know how they're going to respond. We don't know whether they're going to be able to stick to it as they should, compliance. So a lot of things are out of our control. And we sometimes have to just keep helping. I've got an MS patient. He's been coming to us now for 3.5, nearly 4 years. Every 6 months, comes in for a single implant. Just because he wants to make sure that everything's functioning correctly. He hasn't seen a major reversal, but he had a progressive disease. And we've arrested the progression. Mm-hmm. He's thrilled. You can imagine he's thrilled.
Absolutely.
He's not in a wheelchair. He's in work. He's working. He's useful. He's got a family. He's just created a brand new family. Mm-hmm. And to him, he said, look, this is my insurance policy. I'm going to keep going. Now, we haven't seen a resolution. What we've seen is a method of coping with it. And there may be patients out there who may have to go on a long-term program. Others, 5, 6, 8, 10 days, and it's all over and done with, completely gone. Mm-hmm. Crohn's, trickier, always has been trickier. And of course, Crohn's comes in and out of fashion with its triggers and the etiology, the basis of it, the origin of the disease is not really understood terribly well. And every once in a while, somebody flies down a different track and says, oh, it's every third patient that I test has got a bacterium that nobody else has got. And this month it's going to be called Mycobacterium avium subspecies paratuberculosis or something like that, where they go, no, it's the bacterium that's causing it. Well, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what it is, where it just turned up because its competitive good guy was missing, because, they're all antagonistic. If you take one out, there's a vacuum and his friends don't necessarily fill the void. It might be a pathogenic non-commensal that can now enter into the system because you've made space, you've taken away its competitor. So all these things are going on, and we still don't fully understand. Now, it's the neurologicals that have really got me interested.
Mm-hmm.
That's hugely interesting. You're talking about
Glenn, before we go on, I just want to ask you one question about Crohn's. Have you noticed a difference in terms of, with ulcerative colitis, just so for the listeners who aren't aware, by definition, the disease is in the colon. But with Crohn's disease, and this is one of the key differences between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, is the disease can be anywhere in the digestive tract, starting in the mouth, going all the way down to the rectum. So do you see a difference in response in patients that have maybe, Crohn's in the small intestine versus Crohn's in the large intestine?
See, it comes back down to that magic word, the etiology of it. So what is the cause? Now, I know gastroenterologists specializing in Crohn's whose first question to the patient is, did you or do you anytime get mouth ulcers? As a first indicator. And then, can you show me, can you stretch your thumb down to touch your wrist? You know how kids used to do this at school? It looked gross. Or can you actually sort of bend your elbows out straight and it goes the opposite way? This hyperextensive joints, because they've made a very strong correlation between extended ligaments and Crohn's. It seems to work as a marker. With Crohn's, as you know, Chris, there are three primary types. And our experience is that if we're dealing with what's, I think, the most common, the ulcerating type of Crohn's disease, which, as you correctly said, can appear in the ileum, the small intestine, and the duodenum, as opposed to stricturing. It's like somebody's put a rubber band around your gut and is closing it up. That's a stricture, a closure. Or fistulating, where your gut is basically trying to find a second way out. It tries to bore a hole out from the wall of the epithelium. A tube starts to wander off in different directions, not always in the right direction. Now, these are all different methodologies of ways that Crohn's presents. But back to the ulcerating thing. Ulcerating, we get a better crack at it. We get a better response. But it's still a tricky one. And I would say of our Crohn's patients, it's probably no better than 50% respond. And that's because it's autoimmune. And we're looking at how the immune system is attacking itself. And we know in the gut, it's simply that cells aren't recognizing each other and attacking each other, so causing ulceration. Now, whether bacteria need to be on site to stop those cells, or whether we simply need to be changing the bacteria and utilizing the immune cells that are traveling through the bloodstream and getting close to where the bacteria are in the large intestine, where specific species of bacterium talk to T cells, Treg cells, and regulate their immune responses. Basically, I oversimplify things sometimes too much, because I try to describe the bacteria in our gut. All of you, I'll talk in terms of Apple Macs here, because that's what I use. And those of you on PC will just have to, I should have got a Mac. On your computer, your laptop, whatever, it is you. And your immune system is the software that lives on that computer. So that's the software that makes it function. Now, that software is only good whilst it knows what's going on. Every once in a while, the software is out of date because stuff changes. And there's new bits added on, or viruses get into systems, and stuff has to be adjusted. New programming has to be built. Well, bacteria are like the upgrade. A bacteria are OS 10 1.6. No, wait. 0.7. Oh, hang on a second. They've just thought of a workaround of that problem. It's now 1.8. Yeah. So the bacteria, of course, rapidly replicating little bugs that grow in size, split in half, and are nearly almost identical to each other every time. Almost. Every once in a while, something changes and they mutate, but Most of the time, they're making another one just like themselves. As their environment changes, so any little mistake, the mutation, if the mutation gives them a benefit in that environment, yeah, then it's of real good use to them. If it doesn't give any use whatsoever, it disappears off into history. Nobody ever knows about it. So stuff goes on around us. Our environment is literally changing by the second. And our immune systems can't keep up. It's as simple as that. They don't know how to. They're not replicating. They don't know what they don't know. So bacteria being out in the world, seeing things, knowing what to do, constantly replicating, they turn up in the gut and go, hey guys, I've just come from outside, and do you know what everybody else is now doing? And this is how it teaches the immune system. By the way, this is what we're going to do now, because this is how we deal with it. Mm-hmm. So got us, the computer, we got the immune system, the operating system, and the bacteria are today's upgrade to the system. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I want to ask you a couple more questions about, conditions that may or, that you've seen respond well and not respond. And then I want to go back and talk a little bit about bacterial diversity. So one thing I'm sure that's on many people's mind is, I think by now, this has been so mainstream, this connection between obesity and the gut microflora. And, there were articles, I think, in Time Magazine, New York Times. There have been popular books about it. A lot of people, there have been now some studies investigating FMT in humans, clinical trials to determine whether FMT can lead to weight loss in people who are overweight. So I'm just curious to hear what your own internal experience has been with that. First of all, have patients come to you with weight loss as their primary goal? And second of all, even if it's not their primary goal and the main reason they're coming to you is for a different condition, are they seeing any weight loss after FMT?
Actually, yes. It's unintentional as well. Patients are reporting back. But then again, some patients who not being able to eat correctly are managing at long last to put weight back on.
Sure.
But that big story that everybody knows about that hit the press about the rather slim mother who acquired Clostridium difficile chose her daughter to be her donor. The problem was her daughter was actually clinically obese. No, she was morbidly obese, even worse.
Yes.
And within a short time, it rectified the problem. Her Clostridium difficile was eradicated and saved her life, and yay, great. But the mix of bacteria that the daughter was carrying around created its own set of problems, and particularly with the recipient, who had previously got a really nice balance of her two large classes, the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes, of which cascading down are many genera and species that come from those. But the ratio between them, the mass between them, is critical. And the daughter had the wrong balance because she had pre-existing obesity, and she gave those bacteria to the mother, who then struggled like crazy to bring her weight gain back under control. Now, we already chose many years before this incident, that we weren't going to play around with the ratio between Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. And we only chose donors who had pretty much a lifetime of natural slimness. And they weren't artificially trying to manipulate their body weight, because we knew the ratio was already right there. So all our donors are actually really slim, lithe, athletic, and naturally so. And that was the safe way to progress forward.
Sure.
But the stories keep coming out. You almost have to consider choosing a professional donor, if that makes sense, or at least one that has been selected by a very, very careful process. And that will kind of help the situation. Now, there is a lab in Paris. I was at a meeting on last Tuesday week, where there are two specific species. Didn't want to name them at the time, and I wouldn't be able to repeat them now because I've been asked not to, but there are two specific species that are directly related to obesity.
Mm-hmm.
And there's manipulation of these two species going on at the moment in mouse studies again to make sure that now that they've isolated those, that they can get reproducible results. That's the key, that we still get the same results every single time. And that will that should be quite big. So these friends of mine in Paris are currently working on that, and I eagerly await that. Glenn Gibson doing the same thing at Reading University. He's the head of microsciences there. Glenn is also trying to make sense of a fat bacterium.
Right, creator of the word prebiotic.
Yeah, exactly. My mate Glenn Gibson.
Big guy in the field for sure.
Oh, absolutely huge. I keep tempting him to try and join us. Maybe sooner or later.
Good luck with that. So last question I have about conditions are atopic conditions. So things like eczema, allergies. That's another one we might predict could go either way, given it's immune dysregulation. So same reason that could, it's not always successful in Crohn's could apply here. But what do you see with these kinds of conditions?
Oh, very frequently, people with a gut dysbiosis. Let's be honest, that's what they arrive at our door, all of them pretty much with that. Yeah. They tend to talk about their skin conditions and say, what can be done? I said, well, at one point, I'm sure we're going to do a controlled study on this. But at the moment, all I can tell you is it's very, very common. Many, many patients turn up. I think perhaps the majority turn up with some kind of skin condition. And as much as we try to advise them that, this is not a cure for eczema, it's not a cure for whatever you may be expressing with, but I have to say that we watch an extraordinarily high level of remission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those serendipitous moments. We don't aim to do it, but the patients come in and say, look at the size of the patch on my skin. It's half the size. Look, it stopped getting all flaky. It's now just red.
Yeah.
And we see that from days, weeks, months. There's no real pattern. We can't predict that yet. There are no markers that help us to translate that to the patient to give them the encouragement they're looking for.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I've one of my kind of pet areas of research over the past few years has been the gut-brain-skin connection. And I've certainly, as a clinician, it's common for me to see symptoms manifest in that triad. So if someone comes in, they've got depression or anxiety, they've got eczema or psoriasis or acne, the first thing I'm going to be thinking about is testing their gut, and which, for most of my patients is not a surprise because they've been following my work and they know that, they expect that. But occasionally I'll get a person who says, what are you talking about? Test my gut. I'm not, I'm here for my skin or my mood problem. But it is really remarkable to see that connection. And it's not surprising, therefore, to hear about your experience with that.
Yeah, correct, Chris. Sooner or later, people are going to start to make sense of this. We're now getting doctors who are recognizing this, particularly the behavioral side of it, the depression, as a classic example of a kind of a progressive part of IBS.
Mm-hmm.
They get to a couple of years of having IBS, and then they start to really worry, and then they're put on antidepressants. And by the time they reach us, they're popping antidepressants like crazy. And by changing the gut microflora, suddenly we see everything change. There's an emotional element to it. There's an endocrinological, which I guess you can call emotional as well, where there's definitely a hormone issue going on. There's the neurological. Oh, got to tell you this one. You'll love this particular case. This was only 3 months ago. Now, I had never, ever heard of chorioretinopathy. It's a condition, shotgun chorioretinopathy in particular. See, I can't even say it. And I had a patient contact me and say, what can you do? How many patients have you treated with this? And I said, I can barely say it. I've never heard of it. I'm sorry, but I can't give you any direct encouragement. I need to look it up. And it was a kind of an autoimmune stroke neurological thing, mostly neurological. And I said, before we just go into that, can I just go back to my usual? Because I've got this set of questions I got written down, or I'll forget them. These questions are, what was your mother's health like? What was your father's health like? What was all your siblings? What was their health like? Generally in the household, were people well? Did you eat well? Did you not eat well? What was the circumstances of your birth? Were you a vaginal? Sorry, can I say that at this time of the evening?
Mm-hmm.
Were you a normal birth? Were birthed by cesarean section? Were you naturally fed? Were you bottle fed? Were you sick as an infant? Were you sick at school? Were you coming home with everything? The usual kind of indicators that show what that critical acquisition period, the CAP of the first 24 months, to find out whether the child was actually born with the right bugs in the first instance.
Yeah.
So I'm going through this with her, and she's ticking every box. And then multiple exposure to antibiotics. She's really had everything and starting to lose her sight. So comes into for treatment, we are rectifying her gut microflora. We're not dealing with her eyesight. We're not dealing with the neurological conditions. I've said I don't know a thing about that. I'll be interested to record it every single day and take data, because every patient is an incredibly valuable source of data for us. So we get to day 4, and she walks through the door, and I happen to be in reception. She walked through the door, and she said, good morning, everybody. I can see leaves. Now, it's October. It's fall. We can all see leaves. They're all coming down. It's the time of year. So we're kind of nodding, and she says, no, you missed my point. I can see leaves. Yeah, there's a lot, and it was a bit blowy last night. She said, no, when I walk in the morning to see you, trees are a blur. This morning, I can see leaves.
Wow.
And it got that silence in the clinic as well. We all were stunned.
Yeah. I mean, this is what obviously gets people excited to see these kinds of reversals and improvements. And, at the same time, as you said, there's still so much we have to learn here. One of the things that stood out to me about Justin's presentation, and one of the kind of key arguments he was making, is that species diversity seems to be one of the key mediating factors between the gut microbiota and illness, meaning the lower the diversity of species observed in the gut, the higher the chances are of modern disease being present. And we have limited data on this so far, but it's growing all the time. And so it seems to me that that's perhaps one of the benefits of FMT, and also some of the way that you do it in some cases where the FMT is coming from more than one donor, you're increasing that species diversity.
I'm so pleased you slipped that one in. Thank you very much. I was chatting to a friend the other day. He's one of your countrymen, Jeff Leach. His latest book, Rewild, he talks a lot about bugs in that one. Jeff's the guy across in West Tanzania working with the Hadza tribesmen. And Jeff wrote in one of his books that this generation of humans, it has got the worst diversity of microflora of any generation in the entire history of its species. And any hope to restore that microflora from our own number is likely to be a fool's errand, or words to that effect. And I talked to Jeff on a regular basis, and I said, so when I create a stable of donors, each of whom is particularly good at something, because everybody lives in a different place, don't they, Chris? They all do different things. They have kids, they exercise at a particular gym, they go running, they do stuff, they work in an office, they work outside. They eat different things because they like different things. So everybody does something different. And that means you remodel your gut microflora specifically to your environment. So some people are really good at some bacteria and not particularly good at others. So what you said about having multiple donors, that's how it works. We call our donors superheroes because they're just nice people and they're out to help people anyway. But these superheroes have got a particular superhero skill or talent. It's not X-ray vision or super strength. But, if you look at it in terms of, we've got a Hulk, we've got a Captain America, we've got a Thor. They're all great at something, but they're not all good at everything. Mm-hmm. But when we put all our donors together and give one implant per day to the patients, they get the entire Avengers. Do I have to apologize to Stan Lee for that one?
I don't think so. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the other ways of increasing species diversity that don't involve FMT, since, of course, not everyone, unfortunately, will be able to have access to FMT for a variety of reasons. But in Justin's presentation, he showed some N=1, self-experiment data, which was really interesting to me. He mentioned that as a scientist, when he first started studying this stuff, he was eating, I don't think it was an unhealthy diet, but he wasn't really particularly emphasizing his intake of what he calls microbiota accessible carbohydrates. So these are the types of carbohydrates that are fermentable by gut bacteria and that increase the amounts of beneficial bacteria that we have in our gut. So he said that over time, as he was doing all of these experiments in the lab, he just naturally noticed it was influencing how he and his family ate. And he did he's sequencing his own microbiota throughout this entire period, and his species richness went from something like 600 or 550 to 13 or 1400 over a period of time, where the only changes that he really made were to start consuming some fermented foods like kefir and sauerkraut, and then also dramatically increasing his intake of fermentable fiber.
Chris, do you remember the last time you and I went out for a bite to eat? I said something that was diversity on the plate equals diversity in the gut.
Absolutely. I sure do.
Exactly that. And we put that to the test. With all our donors, we presented them a little challenge. I think it was Jeff Leach. We set a little challenge on the basis that the diversity on the plate equals diversity in the gut. We spoke to all our donors because we have such a good working relationship with them, and they understand what we want and what we need. So in one of our little bulletins, newsletters we sent out to them, we set a challenge. We wanted them to try, based on the fact that the average person in the street eats about 25 different food groups in one calendar month. Which is shocking, really.
Yeah.
We asked if they could try to eat 100 different food groups in a month. That was a challenge for them. They went off around the supermarkets. They were looking for different foods. They were going down different lanes, looking for different things they never picked up before. And we had a number of them actually make 100 or close to it. Now, what they didn't know is that we were actually recording the net result. How do we record the net result of our donors increasing the types of foods? Well, we were looking at those who engaged in the process and those who didn't. Now, we could tell the ones who didn't because the amount of microbiota that we can physically harvest and weigh accurately after we've put it through the laboratory is literally that. It's recordable. Now, with those who were eating a broader diversity, and the lab staff didn't know this because we kind of blinded the study, and we looked at the figures that are produced at the end of each day of the number of implants obtained from a given weight of sample, and we watched it rocket for those who were eating a broader diversity of food. So we were looking at, in some cases, 60% increase in the net weight of the net microflora. That's the beauty of the Taymount process. We're not interested in all the other rubbish that gets thrown down the throat. We only want the bacteria. Mm-hmm. We had a 60% increase in the net weight of the microflora with those who had responded favorably to the challenge and started eating like crazy wild people looking for different foods. And that, there's our evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's we've got similar anecdotal reports and from people like Justin Sonnenberg, and I just want this to be a note of encouragement for everybody. You can definitely increase your species diversity by consuming fermented foods, which have a much richer number of species in them than commercial probiotics generally, even the broad spectrum ones. And then also feeding those organisms, some of which are most of which are transient, but you can feed your own internal milieu of gut bugs by consuming fermentable fibers. And I've talked about this a lot. I wrote about it in my book. It's there's lots of information out there about it, but one of the biggest differences between ancestral cultures and our cultures was that many of them consumed over 100 plant species per day, like Glenn was just talking about. And the average American consumes somewhere between maybe 8 and 10, if they're lucky, and probably the average person living in the UK in the industrialized world, and they'd be things like tomatoes, lettuce, things that go on burgers, probably for the most part, maybe carrots and broccoli. And the other biggest difference, which Justin mentioned and has been mentioned elsewhere as well, is the overall fiber intake. That is about 15 grams a day in the industrialized world, whereas in traditional hunter-gatherer societies, you mentioned Jeff Leach and his work with the Hadza. Jeff told me that in his measurements, they consume somewhere between 100 to 150 grams of fermentable fiber a day.
So can you just see? Can you see? It's not what you've eaten. It's what you've eaten eats. Mm-hmm. So you've acquired the bacteria at some point through the oral route, and they're now living in your gut. Now you've got to put something else down there. And you have to feed them, yeah. So diversity and density of the foods as well, the things that the bugs are looking for. If you can't pronounce it, if you've looked on the packet and you don't know what it means on the packet, put the packet down.
Exactly. I know the way I've said it too to my patients is every bite of food you put into your mouth, you have to ask 2 questions. How will it nourish you, and how will it nourish your gut bugs? And it's not always the same. So some foods will nourish your gut bugs more than they'll nourish you, and that's a very valid reason to eat something. So,
while we're on not artificial food, but while we're on processed foods, let's just remember that bacteria, they're determined to survive in a difficult world, and the replication rate being super high, super fast, anything from like 6 minutes, means that they're constantly looking for opportunity to mutate, to be able to get around changes in the environment. And that includes foods are entering into the food chain that are not common to us, brand new foods that are effectively being manufactured. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't expect to find them. Now, one of the problems we're experiencing is when you eat foods for which no commensal, normal bacteria would be normally breaking it down, other species or subspecies or mutated species will find a way of breaking those foods down. Now, what we don't know is what those species are going to turn out to do, be, or make. And specifically, when I say make, they could, as a byproduct of the fermentation, be starting to make neurotoxins. Okay, now those neurotoxins are coming from foods that are not naturally available from the environment. But the bacteria, not knowing what to do, just carry on making stuff. And some of our new foods arriving on our plates that are manufactured compounds are starting to have effects we did not foresee.
Yeah.
Okay, be really, really careful with what you eat. You look at the Israeli studies on sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, and how in place of normal gut microflora, we were mutating bacteria that could break the sweeteners down. And in doing so, the sweeteners were creating neurotoxins, or the bacteria that were surviving on the sweeteners were creating neurotoxins.
Yeah, I mean, it is scary, and there's so much we don't even know. It's like what we don't know about it is in some ways scarier than what we already do know, because what we already do know is scary enough, and there's so much more that we don't know. So I know we've only got a few minutes left here. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's new for you. I know you guys have recently launched a new arm of the clinic, or a new clinic. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, you mean the one very close to you?
Yes, and in a nice warm place.
Okay, we got a call from the Bahamas to ask if they could go into negotiation with us, and we did. Reluctantly, we went over to see them.
Yeah, too bad.
And the net result is today there is a Taymount clinic in Nassau, Bahamas, 25 minutes from Miami, and it utilizes the material from the UK. We couldn't really justify putting a laboratory into an area where the likelihood of finding good donors was just not good enough. So the material flies at minus 80 degrees centigrade. I know you guys work on Fahrenheit. I can't for the life of me remember what that is, but we transport them. It's cold, very cold. So we keep them absolutely stable, and it takes just 28 hours on average from freezer to freezer in a super freezer case that goes on express air freight over there. So it arrives in beautiful condition and goes into storage, and they're providing all the facilities. What's more, because it's in a hospital with all of the support facilities, and they've got a license from the Bahamian government to be able to apply it across a broad range of subjects, we've now got, when I was there in October, we brought on a pediatrician. So they have a license now to treat children. Because we've also got a neurologist on board, we now have the license to treat autism in pediatrics.
Wow.
Okay, that's huge. So that's what we can deal with over there, which we still can't quite get to in the UK because there's a lot of hoops to jump through.
Sure.
So that was big. While I'm talking about us sending material over there, can I just put up, I know I've only got a few seconds. I've got to get this out there because it's critically important. Quarantine. Absolutely vitally important. If you seek fecal microbiota transplant, be aware you can test your donor till, in the English expression, the cows come home. You can test and test, but we have some pathogens we harbor inside us that don't expose themselves to the test until they are just about pathogenic or they've gone crazy inside you. So you can test a donor, go, the donor's fine, they don't have a disease. Meanwhile, the disease wasn't at detectable phase, but they've still got it. So you've taken a sample, you've processed it, you've given it to your patient, and then the patient expresses the disease. So the method that the world should be using is you harvest, you process, you quarantine for 3 months. Magic, 3 months. In 3 months, the donor will tell you whether they've got a disease or not, believe me, because all diseases express within 3 months. All the ones that really matter to us. Yeah. So whatever you do, ensure that you use safe, quarantined material. And just while we're on the material thing, I realized from day one that foods in one person don't work well in another. And I'm not going to use a donor who may have eaten peanuts to use their material in a patient who's going to go into straight anaphylaxis. So I processed out the food. Number one, out went the food. Then I wasn't interested in whether it was a male or female at the peak of particular hormones or not. Let's get the hormones out. So they are removed. Because we've had cases reported in the press of a female at the limit of her female testosterone receiving implants from males at the limit of their male testosterone and it having very complicated results for her, endocrinologically speaking. So it was throw out all the hormones. Then mucus, all the toxins. Remember, we're throwing out rubbish via our liver all the time. And if you are immunologically challenged, you do not want the toxins that your donor was throwing out. The essence is you just want the bugs. The microscopic material is the only thing that matters to you. Ensure that wherever you go, it's processed out to just the microbiome, that valuable little group of bacteria and fungi that live happily together looking after your gut for you.
Makes sense. Glenn, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And we'll do it again in a couple of years, and I'm sure have tons more to talk about at that point.
It's always a pleasure, Chris. All right. Thank you very much for having me.
That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/Chris Kresser or facebook.com/Chris Kresser L.A.C. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.